How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to Muv-Luv Monday, where we're here in a total eclipse. And yeah, so we had an interesting excursion. We went out and about. We went underground and we were able to kind of locate Cryska with Inia's help. And she's in, essentially medical prison, going to be a lab rat till she's no longer around. So that's got to be adjusted quickly. But then, of course, we get out of there and walk right into Weller, who's just like, hello. So yeah, we're about to be, not only are we already essentially committing to being in a real tight spot, but Weller's going to guarantee that we're now no longer going to be able to do what we want. We're essentially going to just we're going to have to toe the line. He's pretty much got dirt on us, a hook, and he's going to just pull us along whatever he wants to do, and he's probably going to cook up some interesting parallel where he's like, oh, we just want you to do what you're doing, just add these steps in or whatever, and it's going to be messy. So yeah, so long go the days of Yuuya having, I'm guessing, is a happy ending here, because I don't see how this can possibly end well. Like, I've been thinking about it all week, and I've just been like, I've been stumped on it. It's just like, I don't see how this has any positive conclusion in any way. So yeah, not looking great. Not looking great. But we're gonna do our best. We're gonna see what happens and see where we go from here. So I guess sitting around is not gonna do us any more good. Let's get started. Well, this time is a bit too convenient for my liking, as the DIA been shadowing me all along. What's the business with me? I'm in a hurry.
焦る必要はない。まだ時間は十分にある。
I hate how confident he is.
いや、むしろことを成したいのであれば、今は急ぐべきではない。
Right, so they want us to succeed in this mission. I'm guessing they want their hands on whatever Russia's cooking. Maybe they've even figured out already through their own espionage system that the Scarlet Twins and the success they've been having, even in the Barkut, have been very much because of them. And so they want to understand maybe more about the resurgence and the post Alternative 3 program. Whatever they're calling it. I think they mentioned it at some point, but I can't remember what it was. At least the name post, whatever they're calling the post Alternative 3. How so?
安心していい。きちんと間に合うよう配慮するさ。君の邪魔をする気はない。
Right, sure. Because I could just trust that. This guy's talking like he knows everything.
いや、しかし、随分と大胆な真似をしたものだな。ブリッジス少尉。ビアチェノワ少尉に会いに行ったようだが、様子はどうだったかね。
How the fetch did you know about that?
サンダーク隊の入管許可はまだ生きているか。ということは、やはりあの男。
Okay, so Sandek... That actually is a perplexing issue. I hadn't really thought of it in that framework, but yeah. Because Sandek he's too good. He would have revoked that permission immediately if he didn't want him anywhere near the compound. So why is it still active? Maybe Sandek, in his own way, wants Yuuya to interfere. Like, he can't directly orchestrate it. But we know he does care for Cryska and Inia, like probably on a personal level that's far too much for what he's supposed to be doing. But he can allow things to happen as long as he has no means of them being traced to him, right? So perhaps there is an option here for that. Maybe Sandek is kind of leaving a door open, a possibility. And if it doesn't work out, oh well. Heck, even if it doesn't work out and Yuuya gets caught, it hurts America. So that's a win in their book too. But if it works and they get out, then maybe his conscience will be happy, even if his job isn't. So in a way, it's almost like there's a win to be made no matter what happens. It's a scalability, maybe. Interesting. How much did you know? Have you been following me? The entry permit was issued through official channels, so the UN forces and the XFJ program should know. A third party could find out by looking at their records easily enough, but the rest?
尾行というのは正確じゃない。部下からの報告と言った方がいいだろうな。
Your subordinates. Oh, maybe he has spies inside the Russian program.
現在君を監視している米ソ当局の者たち、周辺警備の米軍 MP を含め、そのほとんどに我々の息がかかっているのでね。
So they essentially have control over American authorities, Soviet authorities somehow, and even the MPs. Wow. Okay, I understand that, like, that could be possible, but there's so many clashing interests within that net. How do you facilitate that? Like, how do you please all these parties enough that they're willing to risk everything to help a, undercover shady investigation sector of the CIA, which is, I can't remember if he is specifically with the CIA or not, but like, it's clearly something along those lines. Wait, what?
すまんな。前にも言ったが因果な家業だ。君がいかに優秀なアメリカ軍人とはいえ、今回の共謀のほか、様々な嫌疑がかかっているのも事実でね。
Right. It almost feels like he withheld the suspicions. Remember I said, like, oh, you're a citizen, a soldier, of course you're going to be absolved. It's almost like they didn't actually absolve him. They just put it in their back pocket, like hints of evidence or more of like a pattern. The idea being that they just pocket all this evidence. They don't make him feel like extra cautious or like he's being observed. And then when they need to, they're like, pat, 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 look at all this stuff. We have all this information, put it all together, makes you look really bad. Like that might be what it was all about. Pressure points. Are you saying I'm under suspicion?
申し訳ないが、テロ以降、ずっと監視させてもらっていた。
I think I said back then too, I was like, you should not trust this guy for a second. You should assume that they are gunning for you. And granted, I don't blame him for losing track of that. For one thing, I did, and I'm a passive observer. And on the other hand, like, so much has happened since then. So much big, like, attention-grabbing stuff that I totally would absolutely have forgotten about it too. An alphabet boy is a piece of crap. News at 11.
まったく君は、まっすぐというか、愚かというか。だからこそ、信用に足るのだがね。
Can't we be both straightforward and stupid? Seems like they're not, like, exclusionary of each other. Now you say it can be trusted? The fetch?
思った通り、やはり君は尊敬すべきアメリカ人だった。正義と義憤を重んじ、そのために自らを犠牲にすることを厭わない。
He is describing an interesting dichotomy, the idea being that he's trustworthy but not trustworthy at the same time. He's done some things that most people would raise some eyebrows, would call into question. Like, what is he prioritizing? American interests? Clearly not. That doesn't sound like someone you can trust. But then at the same time, he seems to have a strong moral compass. He doesn't compromise. He's a man of integrity. And that's somebody you can trust. You can trust him to, like he says, do what's right, even sacrificing yourself to do the right thing. Now the question becomes, what is the right thing? And in fact, I would argue that the idea and the goal then becomes, how do we make sure that what you decide is the right thing is what we want you to decide? Essentially saying, all right, we're going to take the mentality of somebody who's willing to listen to the rules, who wants to do what's right and just be an upstanding person, like just essentially being not a hero, but like maybe a heroic complex, and not even like saying that as a bad thing. I think a lot of us want to be the hero of the story. We want to be a motivator for good. We want to make a difference. We want to make things better for the people we care about, right? So could you take that very natural, very good thing and just point it in a direction you like? That's interesting. That's actually a really compelling way to potentially try and bring about change, especially societal change, is taking people who are just genuinely want what's best for the world and just kind of feed them maybe the motivations, the interests, and information that kind of gets them up and gets them out to vote and to protest and to write laws in line with directives that you find are the most important, from the position of someone who wants to just control things. It's a lot of micromanagement, but if you have the resources to do it and an organization that's properly equipped, that actually might be an effective way of trying to guide a nation down a particular path. Kind of terrifying because I feel like that's a lot more believable than a lot of conspiracy theories I hear about. Like, there's a lot of crazy conspiracy theories that really feel like one of the biggest reasons why I won't believe them is just because the sheer like level of work to cover up stuff like aliens in Area 51 or the amount of effort and expense needed to do things like trying to put chemicals in the water that make people homosexual. Like, that's something that people actually believe. And it's like, why? Like, what's there to be gained from stuff like that? But this makes sense. It's like, what you gotta, especially if you have a base of people who are not critically educated, maybe even not the best at critical thinking, but just want to be good and do good, have their neighbors and their families be successful, and to let their nation be successful. Take all of those really good feeling things and kind of angle them, point them at certain target, initiatives, actions, and kind of let them go. You don't have to micromanage that too much. You simply have to try and make sure that, when people are getting upset, they get upset about very specific topics and controlling that narrative. And I imagine that's exactly what we are seeing in politics. Unfortunately, it's getting to the point where the micromanaged messaging might be what's taking precedent over, common sense, the ability to recognize compromise being an important integral part of a functioning system. As soon as people stop believing that that's possible, that's when the whole system collapses, regardless of whether it feels good or bad.
君の愚直なまでのひたむきさには参ったよ。報告を読むたびに監視などという行為をしている自分が本当のクズのように思えてきてね。
That's a kind way of saying you're boring. You just said I'm still a suspect.
もし君が本当に工作員だとしたら大したものだ。どうやっても見抜けそうにない。
He's like, oh, I know you're not a double agent. You are, if you were a double agent and I failed to detect you, then I shouldn't have my job, because it would mean I am so bad, I should not even be close to this type of work. That's fair. So if I'm such a model citizen, why am I still under surveillance?
君がビアチェノア少尉とシェスチナ少尉の関心を買っているからだよ。
Again, it's one of those things where it's it's not about you, it's about the people around you. It's about the people who are interested in you, the people who you have influence over. It's a lot harder to target, a person in power or a person of influence or a person who's, on guard and well-trained or even, cautious. It's not as difficult to work on their close relatives and friends, the people who have direct influence over them, but they might not see are being influenced. What? Is that how the whole spy stuff works? They're watching me so they can find out what Cryska and Inia are up to?
どうかね、ブリッジ少尉。
Right, here we go.
ここは一つ、お互い協力し合わないか?
He calls it a beneficial partnership, but the thing is that Weller has all the cards, so it's not actually a partnership. It's a partnership with a gun pointed to your head, with the promise that he won't pull the trigger if you just do what he wants. That's not a partnership. It just has the formula of a deal and partnership. It has nothing to do with balance of power, which is what you need in a partnership. Partnership.
困っているんじゃないか? あの施設からどうやってビアチェノア少尉を連れ出すのか?
And I think what they're really interested in, they're saying look, we help you get her out of there, but they have to come to us for asylum. And I actually mentioned before, I think at the end of the last part, so it's the best case scenario for Yuuya would be to potentially try and get them extracted, and then hopefully the Americans would be willing to grant them asylum, which I said they would, but it would be because they want to know more about them. They wouldn't see them as people either. The UN might be slightly better, but because the UN's entangled in between all the nations, it really wouldn't be a very safe place, because I'm guessing that by UN standards and the agreements they have with Russia, Russia would demand that they be released back. So US is probably the only real true option here.
そして、その後どうするのか?
Yeah. See, Yuuya hadn't thought about this part.
あの二人の救出を我々が全面的にバックアップしよう。そしてあの二人を亡命者として合衆国に保護する。無論、君と一緒に。
That would mean it's the end of his career, though. Like, maybe he could be slowly integrated back into service, but if he's entered to witness protection, then his entire his entire identity has to be essentially rewritten. He wouldn't be able to rest on his laurels. He wouldn't be recognized as a first-class test pilot anymore. He'd essentially be scrubbed. Now, likely they would just insert him into civilian life or introduce him back into test piloting, but maybe in a more like closet phase, a place where even like outside essentially of the system, maybe to being an assistant to somebody like Heinemann directly, somebody essentially a civilian contractor. Political asylum, huh? Yeah, that's my safest bet.
ビアチェノア少尉の件は我々もおおむね把握している。
One question. He said the DIA had operatives in place at the Soviet facilities. Might as well get some information out of this guy. Is the Soviet Union really going to kill Cryska?
残念だが本当だ。衰弱しているのを見ただろう。本来彼女にはある種のワクチンを継続的に投与する必要があるのだが、それを止められているんだ。
Interesting. So a vaccine. A vaccine is an interesting word. I wonder if that's entirely translated correctly, because the idea of a vaccine, remember, like, and the concept and why it's brilliant, why it's so cool that we came up with this. Because remember, before vaccines, people like just died of polio all the time. Influenza literally killed more people than World War II. Like, diseases don't mess around. We take them seriously. We need to take them seriously because like this stuff can really just take people out. But the idea of the vaccine is that whatever is the aggressor, usually a virus, because viruses are much harder to treat than a bacterial infection. But the idea is by introducing like broken viruses that can't, infect, but still pieces of their composition and, what they look like and how like are fed to our system, where our white blood cells and other parts of our immune system find them and learn to recognize them and learn how to attack them. Essentially, our white blood cells in our immune systems do research. They grab a piece of a virus, usually dead because that's how they have to usually find it. They're cleaning up the messes. Then they take the broken pieces to the internal systems. The systems learn, like, first of all, like, how is this, like, put together? And then it develops a countermeasure, a way to like attack the actual makeup of this virus and how to stop it in its tracks. And then they release the antibodies into our body and they just stand there as little soldiers ready to face whatever comes their way. And for a lot of these really debilitating, life-altering, and deadly diseases, once you get exposed once and the immune system learns how to respond and learns how to take them down, it can throw off any actual invasion, any actual infection before it gets so bad it would actually kill you. And that's why these vaccines are amazing. So why would she have to be given a vaccine to combat a disease? That means training her body to recognize a pathogen and be able to combat it. The only reason you would need to keep getting the same vaccine, like a flu shot, is because the whatever the infection is, the source, is adapting and changing rapidly. So you need to come up with a new introduction system every time it changes, because eventually they change in a way that become immune to what our bodies are doing to counteract them. But why would she need a dose of a vaccine if they're not giving that dose to other people? Why are only people in the Alternative 3 program apparently affected by this? So that means to me that either it's a type of biological like emergency plug button. So to kind of essentially to make it so that if one of them were to get captured, they would die before they could, like, too many of the secrets could be like discovered. Essentially, like it's like a remote kill switch that needs no remote. So you could almost think of it as she's perpetually infected with a disease, and like a vaccine just kind of tempers the symptoms. But that still doesn't quite match what a vaccine does. On the other hand, it may not actually be a vaccine, but simply a type of suppressant. Maybe there is a fatal flaw inside their biological structures. Part of the reason why they can sense and have these limited psychic powers is what turns their own body against them, like a kind of an autoimmune response. Like the same thing that can happen to why, so if you have a peanut allergy, you ingest or even touch a peanut, and your body freaks out thinking you're being invaded by something, and it overreacts, and that overreaction is so intense it kills you. Like that's how that process works. So what if they are allergic to themselves and what it is that it takes to make them have these powers? So if you didn't give them this medicine, this whatever it is, like an immunosuppressant, they eventually just swell up and die, like almost like they're allergic to existence. That would make a little more sense, especially with the periodic injections for this medication. But then they chose vaccine, so I'm not sure why. A vaccine? On top of pumping her full of drugs and the post-hypnotic suggestions? What the fetch is that all about?
MK ウルトラ作戦か。懐かしき CIA の愚策だ。彼女たちに施されているのは、そんな生優しいものではない。
Operation MK Ultra. So, is this operation and what's happening with Alternative 3, was the CIA involved in it and maybe even built this failsafe for the Soviets? What the heck's that supposed to mean?
彼女たちの能力についてはもう知っているのだろう?
More or less. Some kind of psychics, I think.
そうだ。ソ連は彼女たちが裏切ったり、敵の手に渡るのを防ぐため、特殊なワクチンを定期的に投与しなければ死ぬように仕組んである。
So I was right in that regard. They're been designed to die.
ああ。その
Son of a bee. I can't believe that part of me still wanted to trust Captain Sandak. Again, I don't think Sandak's evil. I think he's thorough, efficient, and determined to succeed. He tries to find a good middle ground, but ultimately he seems to side with success of the nation, thinking of the nation as a whole rather than the people he cares about. And that's the problem. Well, not anymore. Now I know darn well where that piece of garbage stands. He's our enemy. I don't agree with that.
安心していい、ブリッジ少尉。ビアチェノワ少尉は合衆国の薬理学で生かすことができる。工作員を潜入させていたのはそのためだ。
Okay. What?
彼女たちを合衆国に亡命させ、ソ連に対しては生体兵器化の人体実験、その事実を公にすると圧力をかける。そうすれば、KGB もおいそれと手出しはできまい。
Right. They'll have enough evidence with this mechanic. They could just show it and being like, look, they're using this as a tool to motivate people into working for them. They don't even have to reveal it has anything to do with Alternative 3. And then, if they just die of a random disease, it just makes the Russians look bad. So at that point, at the negotiation table, the Russians might actually be motivated to provide what is necessary to keep them alive. Ooh, that's a really dirty dealing, and I don't like how much risk that throws at the feet of, Cryska and Inia. The KGB's involved?
ああ。サンダーク隊の古巣でもある。放っておけば必ず追っ手がかかるはずだ。
Right, Cryska and Inia are military secrets. Should have connected the dots earlier.
ベータ大戦による前線国の倫理崩壊は目を覆うばかりだ。ここで歯止めをかけねば人類に未来はない。そのためには彼女たちの保護が必須となる。確たる証拠がなければ、これまで通り各国がしらばっくれておしまいだ。
And again, we can't trust this. Sure, he's probably saying a lot of truths, but that's the idea, is he's presenting the best case scenario with limited information to get Yuuya on board. He's turned Yuuya against Sendak, and now he's trying to paint the Americans as the wholehearted good guys who just want things to be okay. And while that could be a natural consequence and a positive, they really just want the Scarlet Twins. They want to understand the project, they want to understand the technology, they might even want to try and replicate it, at least in a small scale. I don't understand. Why am I hesitating? Well, what they're saying makes sense, but there's something about it that rubs me the wrong way. Good! Humanity can't spare a thought about what the world at large will look like after the beta are gone. The environmental fallout from nukes, G-bombs, and the AL shells, heavy metals is proof enough. But that's the thing, like they want the Scarlet Twins for the post, or at least they want to be able to counteract what the Scarlet Twins are, because the Soviets will be really strong if they have them on their side in the post-Beta War, which is, I think, Weller's ultimately driven to do. They want to try and defang the Soviets. Our success in preventing Redshift from taking place was a large part due to Cryska and Inia's abilities. I can hate Sendek for what he did to them all I want, but can I really ignore the fact these inhuman and unethical experiments are helping humanity hold the front? I would have swallowed Weller's words hook, line, and sinker if it weren't for my little stint at the front lines. Maybe I lost my marbles back in Kamchatka. By the way, it's funny because, like, ironically, Kamchatka has been on my mind a lot. Like, it just seemed like an interesting place, and it's stuck in my head ever since I've been reading this. And someone on Reddit, like, I don't even know why I was on there. I just occasionally end up floating there because I'll get a shared post or something, and I just kind of, like, I'll scroll a little bit. And there was a post someone had made where they'd circled the Kamchatka Peninsula and said, what is right here? And, like, people were answering and sharing pictures and, like big mountains, volcanoes, talking about, like, all the wildlife was there. And apparently, like, it can be expensive, but, like, people will go there because it's, like, a really naturally beautiful location with very little urbanization of any kind. And it's like, man, now I want to go. Look, I won't deny your sales pitch sounds great in theory, but I haven't heard anything about a plan. Does the DIA want to get in a fight with the Soviets or something?
Yeah, 合衆国は表立って動かない。当然、実行は君一人でやってもらう。
Right. Any possible deniability, which means no direct interference. That's the idea all along, but the place is practically a fortress. I need support and equipment.
潜入や脱出の段取り、通信や警備システムの無効化などの支援は任せてもらって構わない。
That leaves the matter of equipment. It would be a suicide attempt to cross the border on foot or in a car.
ちょうどいいものがあるじゃないか。彼女の救出と亡命にうってつけの装備が。
Oh yeah. Just having a perfect piece of hardware that's already perfect for this entire situation, like it hasn't been prepared and waiting for an opportunity. Don't beat around the bush.
君が鍛え上げた94セカンドだよ。
They're literally going to say that he should use the stealth tech on his TSF to accomplish this mission. That's really weird. I really don't like that. That's a bizarre way to go for it.
ステルス機であれば敵地への隠密侵入、追撃の撹乱にはもってこいだ。
Are you seriously telling me to hijack the Shiranui second?
強奪か。私は奪還と考えているのだがね。
Yeah, but illegally recovering a vehicle is a hijack. At the very least, we could flavor it as pirating it, because at least that sounds kind of fun. Now you're playing semantics.
我々の調査では、あの機体には間違いなく YF-23 の封印技術が転用されている。
See, he says that, but he can't actually know that. Nor can he know it would be accepted as such after, like, the investigation's over. He's making a presumption that they were using to try and put pressure on the interrogations, but if they actually had the proof, they wouldn't be bothering to interrogate still. This is not true. Not this crap again. Yes, the layout and exterior frame are similar, but that's because the machine is designed for close quarters combat and superior aerodynamic control. The active stealth is...
それはハイネマンの奇弁だ。アクティブステレス機能やそれに関わる装置には電子的制限をかけて性能を低く見せているに過ぎない。
Now if that's true, that's really interesting. What did you say? Do you have any proof?
提出されたものとは違う使用設計図面を入手している。実際に機体を調査すれば物証が上がるだろう。
Right. The DIA managed to place a covert operative into the heart of the XFJ program. How in God's name did that happen?
仮に日本が独自に開発したというなら、国防上その性能を丸裸にしておく必要がある。まあ、その可能性はゼロだがね。
Again, it kind of sucks that the XFJ program was pushed ahead because it really might have been better if we'd let this all develop in Japan where, like sure, America has a lot of reach, but I don't know if it would have been this direct. He's got a point, but offhand way he says it pisses me off.
何はともあれ、この降って湧いた事態に 恥ずかしながら胸をなで下ろしている。というのが我々の偽らざる心境さ。
Oh yeah, I'm sure you're just thrilled to pieces. What are you talking about? He's like, oh, we get a win-win-win. You see, like, we weren't. Maybe he's also gonna say like the interference into the XFJ program was from a different group or department, and these guys at the DIA are like, ah, crap. We really wanted this to go through. It was gonna be a good boon for us. But now that Yuuya is kind of overstepping his bounds on this side, they're like, oh, wait a minute. If we allow this to happen, it might let us win on both fronts.
94セカンドをあの仕様に組み上げるのは、本来なら日本に持ち帰ってからだったはず。もしそうされていたら、こちらも全く手出しできなかった。
Okay, yeah, so I was right. Yeah, if it had been done in Japan, it would have kept it safe.
彼らがなぜ最後の詰めであのような自滅的な行為に及んだのか、甚だ理解に苦しむところだが。
Assuming Weller's telling the truth, why would Heinemann go along? Can't be because of my report. Every single stage of the XFJ program was planned well in advance. Improvisation simply wouldn't cut it.
考えられるのは、それを晒しても問題のない状況。それ以上のものが手に入った。あるいは、その危険を冒してでも予定を変更せざるを得ないほどの政治的アクシデントがあったのではないか。我々はそのいずれかだと見ている。
The Barkut. I think that and the interference that we anticipated, the Russians are putting pressure on the Japanese and with the plan to switch over. Because, that actually would make sense because the people who were on board with the XFJ program who knew the internals and knew that the Shiranui Second was going to be a much stronger monster than it seemed, and that it in fact would be not only an effective weapon against the beta, but an effective weapon against other nations, including the US. They were wanting to make it go through, but then the Russia influence started to come in, and it was making a lot of the people start to think to switch over. And if that happened, then they would sacrifice everything, including the potential to have a new competitive, cutting-edge, stealth-based TSF applicable system. And so now they're like, well, crap, now we have to try and win because we got to prove that we need the Shiranui Second and the XFJ program. But unfortunately, America was just waiting. They were waiting for that to happen.
例えば、日本とソ連の外交的な駆け引きだ。さすがに対外諜報となると、その情報精度は CIA に大きく水を開けられているのだが。
Okay. So the DIA is probably this world's version of the FBI. Or at least something similar to it. That maybe the DIA actually exists in America, and I just don't know because it's not a prominent organization, government organization. But the necessity of the world in alternative makes it so that it has a lot more reach and applicability than something like the FBI.
このところ、日本帝国軍内の国粋右派が兵器調達のアメリカ支配を懸念し、対策を講じた。つまり、XFJ 計画へのカウンターとして、ソ連に急接近し始めた。
Right. I heard some of the officers in the Empire wanted to introduce the Soviet TSF as the next mainline TSF, but gosh darn it, I had no idea so much was going on behind the scenes.
君たちが行っていた二国間相互評価プログラムだが。
Right.
サンダーク大尉が進める研究とハイネマンのステルス。現時点でどちらが実用性に勝るかを検証するための実証テスト。というのが我々の結論だ。
Right. Holy crap, that explains everything. No kidding, huh? A proxy battle between the Japanese and the Soviet big shots.
むしろ全世界に向けたデモンストレーションである可能性が高いだろう。
Isn't that the usual Soviet Union's sales pitch? A show of force to highlight how their weaponry system is superior?
いや、それを仕掛けているのはソ連そのものではなく、サンダーク大尉という線が濃厚だ。
That's interesting, because that's not the impression I got from the insights that we've seen from his perspective. Granted, I think he wants his program to succeed, but I'm not sure if he wanted to make a big, clamor to the whole world specifically. I felt like that was his superior that was doing that. Come again?
実のところ、ソ連上層部はサンダーク大尉の研究に懐疑的だ。むしろ、 より現実的なステルス技術を喉から手が出るほど欲しがっている。
Again, I don't think it's actually Sandek, but his higher up. But like the idea is like, how perfect would it be to be like, no, we don't need stealth tech because we have people that can counter stealth check, something that none of the other nations have. They all are competing for stealth tech, but if we have a perfect counter, psychics, who can see right through it, but they don't know why, that's a huge edge, because then nobody else can really do or understand that. I don't get it. Shouldn't the Soviets want a TSF focused on close quarters combat, something that gives them an edge against swarms of enemies, or conquer a hive and retake their own national territory? Stealth makes almost zero difference when the enemy's up in your face. If you ask me, sticking with something like Cryska's abilities would be the smart move.
ソ連は先日のテロの際、自国領内にあった G 弾研究施設をインフィニティーズによって破壊されている。
Oh, you're just gonna drop that bombshell? Oh, okay. So that's what they were doing. They destroyed a facility where they were researching G-bombs. Cool. So that must be Russia's Alternative 5 program. The Soviets were researching G-bombs, and the Infinities put a stop to it. Are you serious? Aren't they supposed to be a combat instruction unit?
その名目だからこそ、国連軍、いや、ハルトウィック大佐は受け入れざるを得なかったんだ。急遽ソ連遠征を組むなどして、しばらくの間はのらりくらりと交わしていたようだが。
So he's implying Hartwick was also involved in all of that. Maybe that's true, but I don't see it. Hartwick seemed to me to be... I feel like he's playing the role of mediator. Like, he genuinely is trying to keep, like, all the balances between the nations relatively even. So why would he want to do this unless the Russians were planning to use the G-bombs that they gained, like, not necessarily for fighting the beta? He means that live fire tests in Kamchatka, right?
テロの際、インフィニティーズは CIA の作戦で動いていた。
Huh.
第一目標は、ソ連が独自に開発を進めている G 弾研究施設の破壊。そして、第二目標が、ポールネー・ザトミーニー計画。つまり、スカーレット・ツインの確保。
Now that's weird though, because remember, they saw Inia flying in her TSF, fleeing from the terrorists. They were there for that. If their goal was to capture the Scarlet Twins, why didn't they do it then? That would have been the perfect time. That explains why they showed up out of nowhere during our battle with the terrorists and why they were so well acquainted with the Soviet Union's geography.
第二目標の達成は、レッドシフト発動という想定外の事態によって見送られたがね。
I can kind of see that. They had to prioritize the G-bomb facility first, and if they hadn't accomplished that goal yet, they couldn't just go after her. Beyond their expectations, then the terrorists were acting alone.
当然、CIA の連中はテロリストの動きを把握した上で利用していた。テロ細胞が極秘のベータ研究施設にまで浸透しているとは考えなかったようだが。
Yeah, again, so the terrorists were essentially allowed to do their attack, but they assumed that they had it all under control. Remember, they even had the bombers ready to just nuke the entire facility. They pretty much were already in the air when it all went down, and if the beta hadn't been there, it just would have been game over for all of us. So that was Leon's research. Oh my gosh, I just realized too, the coordination actually of the bombing run. It was supposed to be tied so the Infinities could destroy the secret base, maybe go in and like extract the Scarlet Twins, and then destroy the facility. The Scarlet Twins are listed as just KIA, so they go missing into the bowels of the Americans' like underbelly. Nobody even knows that they were captured and are being like used to examine, test, and like extrapolate from. And the G-bomb facility is destroyed. The Soviets can't actually talk about it, despite the fact that there's no way the terrorists or the strike to try and stop the terrorists could have possibly destroyed it. But it's all kind of brushed under that rug because they can't bring it up and they can't actually investigate either. You know, you put that all together and suddenly the Infinity actions and the US overall reaction all lines up perfectly. A lot of like friends would have been sacrificed, but the Americans come out on top and everyone assumes it had nothing to do with us. The clean-cut upfront guy like him doing the CIA's dirty work.
そういう荒っぽいのが連中のスタイルでね。方々で恨みを買ってる。おかげで DIA はその尻拭いに奔走というわけさ。
Right. Right. The CIA tried to like really tried to stack the deck, and they took a lot of big risks, and it didn't pay off. What?
合衆国に暮らす多くの人たちの安全を守るためなら、どのようなそしりでも受ける覚悟はできている。国内でテロの発生を許したことは我々の大失態だ。だからこそ、アメリカ国民を二度と危険にさらす事態は、命に変えても阻止するつもりだ。
Yeah, when he said allowing a terrorist attack to happen, he meant that literally. Agent Weller isn't passing the buck the same as last time. The guys are prepared to take the heat for anything that could be blamed on the United States, no matter who's actually responsible. I can trust a man with the right set of principles.
話を戻すが、ソ連上層部の連中は、ステルス戦術機による G 弾研究施設爆撃が相当トラウマになっているらしい。
Right, because as soon as that happened, they wouldn't be able to talk about it, but it would mean that they had messed up and somehow America had found out, knowing that America knew they had broken their treaty, essentially, which essentially meant that America had way more power over them than even they had before. And so that was probably the real reason why all the higher ups at the Soviets just had to retire or removed, because a lot of them saw that as a huge mistake and way too much outside pressure and compromise that had happened. So they used the events around the terrorist attack and the red shift or red line. They used that as an excuse for why they retired, but it wasn't why they retired.
サンダーク隊はその状況を逆手に取り、ステルス機を圧倒することで自身の影響力拡大を狙っているというわけ。
Man, I just can't see how the stealth has any value as a benchmark compared to the Soviet twins' abilities.
ソ連の中枢は巨大な官僚機構であり、熾烈な権力闘争で足を引っ張り合っている。その手の連中は何より失敗することを恐れる。
Interesting. I wonder if that is truly cultural today. If that's why the stuff that's going on in Ukraine is continuing, despite the fact that it's very much it feels like it's been way too costly and way too damaging for the long term, and just it makes no sense why it's still going on. But it's because the failure of declaring that you're going to do something and having it fail feels worse.
リスクを伴う成功や利益より確実な数字や実証済みの安全に飛びつき、未来を衰えさせるものさ。仮に G 弾にせよ通常戦力にせよ、ベータ大戦に勝利したとしよう。それは人類間戦争の時代が戻ってくることを意味する。
Actually, I don't have a good screenshot of him, and this is a pretty good one. But we got to remember too, this sentence right here, this line, is essentially the entire backbone of what The Day After is, and whatever its follow-up title is. Which, by the way, fantastic. If you've been following and reading Muv-Luv and you haven't read The Day After, you absolutely should. Yeah, no kidding. Humanity's been pushed to the brink of destruction, but even now we can't get our crap together and stand united.
とはいえ、それこそが人類最大の強みであるのも事実だがね。人類間戦争が復活したからといって、いきなり地球上のベータ個体数がゼロになるわけではない。つまり、当分はその両方に対応可能な国家戦略が求められるということだ。
So that's the excuse he's going to give for the development of the stealth tech. They're saying well, it is technically useful in the beta war, even if it's not directly, and it's far more applicable to human wars.
特にレーザー属種。奴らを背部のスタブを含む全ユーラシアから一掃するには、十数年から20年はかかるという試算もある。その間、人類の主力兵装は、対人戦闘能力を備えた戦術機になるだろう。航空機が花形の座を取り戻すのは、その先だ。
Yeah, so he's saying that, so this is again where they grossly underestimated the strength of the G-bomb super bombing, the carpet bombing they did. because they're assuming that it'll destroy all the towers, all the spires, but that there will still be beta lost amongst the middle. And while like it should eliminate the ability for more hives to start, they still have to clean up what remains. And so he's saying that like until they actually clean up what remaining laser cluster out there, TSFs cannot be replaced by air support. Like maybe it'll become more common, but it'll always be like the threat of like instant death if you cross over the horizon and a laser class is available. Ironically, that is not quite true because they have found, I don't know if it's just not common knowledge at this point, but that laser class require recharging fairly regularly. They're the first of the beta to burn out, where they can't be gone too long and especially can't be operating in a combative state for very long before they have to go back to the hive to recharge. So theoretically, if you actually eliminated all the hive cores and just waited long enough, all the lasers would become impotent. But he's talking like that's not the case, so maybe they just don't know yet. Because Yuko-sensei, like we get spoiled by Yuko-sensei. She knows way more about beta and everything than she even tells people. And so it's hard to know when we build a lot of our information off of the core games. It's really difficult to know exactly what would be known by everyone else. So anyway, all said and done, this again is a very strong highlight of how they don't quite understand just what it means when they detonated all the G-bombs, because like they're assuming there's going to be landmass left when it turned out there wasn't. Like Europe, Asia, and I think even most of Africa inadvertently, even though they didn't bomb it, was just gone, just eliminated, and everything was thrown out of whack.
レーダー索敵や長距離誘導弾が用いられる対人戦闘において、最も有効なのはステルス戦能力だ。
I mean, that's true. That's the case today.
その有効性については、合衆国でのダクトのデータ以上に、先のユーコン事件やブルーフラッグ演習で、ラプターが嫌というほど世界に見せつけている。
Right.
言ってみれば、ベータ大戦後の無益な人類間の争いに、合衆国が警鐘を鳴らしたようなものだ。
See, again, that's a very skewed viewpoint. He's saying it's like, oh, it's America trying to sell everybody. Like, we really can't rely on conventional means of combat. We need to try and make sure we resolve without fighting. Essentially, he's using the argument we use for the reason why we have nuclear arsenal. The idea of like, well, clearly we could just everyone could just kill each other indiscriminately. So we've got to avoid that from happening, which is true. But like, it's the same argument. But at the same time, underneath it, it's also this idea of like the United States will not stop being the dominant power in the world just because the beta go away. Like that's the message they're really saying is like, look, you can't beat us. Don't try.
火遊びをすれば、こいつできついお仕置きをするぞ、とな。人類全体の平和のためにも、国家安全保障の観点からも、G 弾とステルス技術は合衆国が独占すべき、というのが、CIA の大義でもある。
I'm feeling very called out, and it's very embarrassing because it's so freaking true. For the sake of world peace, we should be the ones that have all the power and all the ability and capability of mass weapons of destruction and perfect execution. So that if anyone dares try to, bring harm to general people and the small nations of the world, we will make sure to protect them. That sounds so benevolent and lovely. And not like somebody who rules in everything but name.
だからこそサンダーク隊は、戦術機開発の奇才、ハイネマンの最新ステレス機を叩きのめし、彼の研究がそれ以上だと証明したいのだろう。
I've said it before, and I'm going to say it many times. I think Weller isn't really lying, but I also think that he's very much coloring and twisting the facts into making it sound make him sound very reasonable. I do think there's a lot more layers to it, and I do believe Sandek isn't actually the big bad. I think Sandek's probably one of the more reasonable people within the hierarchy of Russia. He just doesn't compromise when it comes to his homeland. He wants to make sure that Russia is strong and Russia remains in control, even if he's fighting other Russians. Makes sense. I get why he says that. I totally do. I'm not holding that against him, even though I do think he's very wrong here. A twisted mindset, but one that's easy for me to understand because I used to be the same. Forcing others to acknowledge you by taking the guys at the top down a notch or two is something I'm familiar with.
彼の野望はそれだけにとどまらない。日本帝国軍国水右派のソ連接近にもその影がちらついている。
That's interesting because he's kind of right there where, remember, he specifically approached Yuuya and tried to offer a potential, like, hey, our nations might benefit greatly from each other. But I don't think he's the one who's pulling the strings in all of this. In fact, I feel like it's been made pretty clear that he's been backed into a corner. So I really don't think it's Sandek. I think it's one of his superiors. But Weller, for whatever reason, is either trying to just spin it so that Yuuya is, like, not going to ask too many questions and just focus on, like, extracting them from him, or Weller is just misinformed. Either way, it's devastating. Figures, man like him wouldn't let his opportunity pass him by.
高村中尉に対する暗殺未遂事件もその一環ではないかと我々は見ている。
Now, again, that was Sandek. I do believe Sandek. It made it pretty clear that Sandek did order for that, but that was out of fear that because she has some really important clues, and whether she knows it or not, he didn't want to risk her accidentally giving out more information about the whole setup. What? Captain Sandek was part of the plot against Yuuya. Whoa, back the fetch up. Seriously, everyone knows Yuuya was shot in retaliation by the terrorists.
いや、我々の捜査の結果、残党にそのような組織行動力が残っていたという証拠は確認できていない。
And he is right here.
ビアチェノワ少尉たちと行動を共にしていた高村中尉は、レッドシフト阻止行動の最中、ポールメイ・ザトミーニー計画に関する何がしかの機密を知ってしまったのだろう。
The mother trucker! As if fetching up Cryska and Inia's lives wasn't enough, he had the gall to go after Yuuya too. And again, like, it's like he's lying with the truth here. Because it's like, there's truth there, but he's using it to make sure Yuuya isn't going to deviate from his current, like the direction he's going. Remember I said, like, it's not about trying to make Yuuya or pressure Yuuya into believing or behaving a certain way. It's about just taking Yuya's natural tendencies for good and being his integrity and just making sure it's pointed in the right direction. That's really what he's doing.
高村中尉がそこに自覚的かどうかは関係ない。結局それ自体が国水右派に対抗する XFJ 計画推進派への揺さぶりに利用された側面があるからだ。
Shake up the status quo? What's that supposed to mean?
つまり、国水右派が主張するソ連機との比較試験受け入れと、高村中尉の暗殺指令撤回がバーターになったということだ。
Oh, interesting. I wonder if that's true. It feels oddly convenient because I'm pretty sure that those talks were already going in, but like, that would be an interesting exchange, especially because that would be a powerful pull to use against, what's her, like, uncle's name? Iwata, I think? Because he would likely respond to that type of threat. Wait a second. Doesn't that mean that Sandek played the Japanese nationalists like the gosh darn fiddle? All in an effort to counter the US-backed XFJ program?
英氏は人類が掲げる剣の切っ先。その部は清掃に首を突っ込むことではないぞ。
Good. Listen to that advice, because she's right. And the other thing, too, is to point out, like, I would, like, my counterpart, if I could stand there with Yuuya and be there, I'd be like, wait, but think about this. If Sandek really wanted all of this, why would he give you permission to interact with Inia and Cryska at all? Wouldn't he have tried to keep them away? Wouldn't he have tried to push them to fight against you and to avoid influencing with you at all? And yet he incorporated you in. You could counter-argue and say that, of course, like, oh, well, there was some kind of positive feedback that was coming from the connection with Yuuya. But even then, like, the situation could have been replaced. Like, if Inia was asleep, they could have just brought in a different Cryska replacement. And, you know, maybe her waking up was tied to Yuuya, but they didn't know that. They gave him permission to visit anyway. So why would Sandak do that except for the fact that he has the personal motivation for their well-being? I don't think it had anything to do with any of this, and that's kind of counterintuitive to what Weller's telling us.
正義感も正論も結構だが、貴様はそこに行くべきではない。安易に踏み込めば必ず不幸になる。
She's right. I think he can't avoid it at this point, like he's got to intervene, but he needs to stay as far away from this as he can, and he really needs to do things under his own power if possible. Crap, what if this guy said, if what this guy said is true, then Captain Sandak will stop at nothing. But what's his end goal?
高村中尉が現場に復帰したのは、取引に従い比較試験が実行され、暗殺命令が解除されたからだろう。
See, I don't know. Maybe that's the truth, but it just doesn't feel right. Did she know?
当然、すべて知っているだろう。
So why did she keep everything to herself? What, she didn't want us freaking out or something?
当然知っているだろう。もちろんそれは彼女だけではない。フランク・ハイネマンもだ。
I think they know a lot of this, but I feel like that's because they figured it out, not because they were told they were in on it from the beginning. I really don't think, based on how Yuuya was behaving, I really don't think that she's like understood that her life was a bargaining chip for the programs to be put to competitive natures. I don't think so, especially because if she knew, I don't think she would have stood for it.
実は我々のチームは以前からハイネマンの内定をメインに動いている。テロの捜査を受け持ったのも、君たちへの接近を警戒されないための措置だった。
Now that I believe. Gosh darn, this crap is right out of a spy thriller.
XFJ 計画が動き始めて以降、彼は再びソ連に色目を使い始めている。
Yeah, the old man was acting shady as fetch in Kamchatka. The whole buddy-buddy routine he's got going with Sandak and stuff like that, but that begs the question, why would Heinemann approach the Soviet Union? What's in it for him?
ビエルクトは彼がリークした F14 の直径。94セカンドは YF23。共に名機と言われながら、悲運を背負った機体。
So he wants a new lease on life for his babies because the old one's got the short end of the stick? Not that hard to believe, knowing what the old fart's like. Did he come up with the idea of running comparative tests too?
その通り。今回はどちらに転んでも彼の手による高性能機が生き残る。というわけだ。
It's interesting though because like they're basing this premise on the whole on simply on his pride, which I mean that's a powerful tool, don't get me wrong, but it's not like he's going to be getting royalties or anything. That's not really how this world works anymore. And that feels like a very kind of weird reason to play the political game. Like he's playing the political game just for his own ego, that like no thought whatsoever for any of the other ramifications that could come up. Especially, yeah, because essentially Weller's also saying that he knew that Yuuya was going to be made a pawn in this whole thing, and he clearly cares about Yuuya and her family. Like he has that personal connection. So I feel like there's a lot of like Weller's making leaps, whether intentionally or otherwise, that don't quite add up with what we've actually been told. But that doesn't really matter because again, like it doesn't really matter because like either Weller's lying on purpose to manipulate Yuuya to doing what he wants, or Weller genuinely believes all of this, even if he's made some improper connections, and he's still motivated to use it to get Yuuya to do what he wants. And so the outcome's not really different. I can't help but I can't just swallow it because there's little bits and pieces that really don't make sense if you think about it. JC, Heinemann's been working with Sandak all along. See, that doesn't make sense.
だが我々の懸念はそこじゃない。94セカンドの技術が日本経由でソ連に渡れば、いや、その逆でも結果は同じだが、戦後合衆国の軍事的優位性は地に落ち、挽回不能となるだろう。
I also don't believe that. Maybe the Scarlet Twins could. They could, potentially. The Shirinu second, even if it's at its best, I really doubt it was going to be able to compare with the F-22. Like, I just don't see that being the case. The Infinities and their Raptors were freaking terrifying. And I just don't see that a fully unshackled Shiranui second maybe could be on par with them, but not superior. Like, and they also have already like clarified that the U.S. is already working on its next big thing. So why, like, that's a weird leap in logic to make here. Again, I feel like they're just trying to manipulate him.
もし通常戦力によるユーラシア奪還がなれば、領土内に背部を多く抱えるソ連、ついで中国が莫大な G 元素を得ることになる。
Ah, that is true. If they are capturing hives, G elements become common. The United States has kind of the monopoly right now because the only hive that's been recaptured was Yokohama, which was by the Americans. Oh, that even makes me wonder. So remember how they released the G-bomb on it while forces were engaged still, and it was seen as a betrayal of Japan. What if it really was a betrayal of Japan, but not in a way they could publicly talk about? They talk about like the shame of how many Japanese soldiers died on the lines defending it, and that it was used because the Americans felt like it was a hopeless battle that they couldn't win, and so it was used as the last resort. But what if that's not the case? What if the Japanese were getting too close? Like, the plan was always to use the G-bomb. They just assumed that the conventional warfare tactic would fail, but the Japanese were actually pulling it off. So they launched a G-bomb to destroy it, to prevent the Japanese from getting access to all that material and making sure the United States got to it, which is why they sent in their TSFs right after that detonation into the hive, which is where they ended up recovering the brains in the jars, which become the big part of Alternative. But that whole initiative and that whole direction, the reason why they launched the missile was to both test the G-bomb to make sure it would work and to make sure that the Japanese didn't get access to the materials in the hive, but the United States did. Now that they're the only ones with the material, and every scrap of that material that Yuko has to get from the UN is essentially like she has to sell like the secrets of her information, like the most valuable stuff in the world, like like what she's figured out, like her technology, her secrets, and she has to use that as bartering chips in order to get the G elements that she needs for Alternative 4, which she barely gets enough to do. And then look what she can do with it. And Americans have so much that they're able to literally blow up half the planet with what they've got. That makes a lot more sense. The United States is highly motivated not to be on the top of the TSF game. They want that. They're willing to put resources into that, but the real goal is controlling G elements. Because if anyone else gets their hands on it, they lose the edge, the true edge they have. They won't allow that to happen, and that's why they're pushing so hard for Alternative 5, because Alternative 5 guarantees that all the hives will be destroyed, so that all the material will only be harvestable by the forces that remain with any strength, which would be the United States, and it also prevents other nations from capturing the majority of them anyway. It's a way of control. Alternative 5, for a lot of the people in the higher-ups of America, isn't actually about saving the world from the beta. That's why they have the outbound fleet, because they want to make sure that if they did goof it up, that humanity doesn't die, but it also guarantees the United States will always be in control. It's so much bigger than I thought it was. Like, it's a plan that is so much like wider in scope. I never saw that aspect of it, but this makes so much sense. That piece just clicks into place so perfectly. They really don't want G Element in the hands of anyone else. And then that even paints like a really interesting picture for the day after, right? Because the day after is about the recapture of the last hive. They take it by conventional means, and they're all so excited to get that G Element. So now what are they going to do with it when it's not like just America that has access to that? They lose that edge because they literally can't afford to take a hive by themselves anymore, and they don't even have any more G-bombs probably. So they have to resort to that, but that means other people like Japan are going to have access to G elements. And once that happens, and Japan's really pushing this idea of like, hey, we don't have to be subservient. Does that mean that in like the day after part 2, like the next, like, well, it had like different parts in that, but like whatever the next phase is that going to be a war of domination where part of Japan is going to try and overtake and destroy and take over the United States using G elements to back up some of their technology like the railgun? Oh, fetch me. That gets really interesting. Because then you have the question of like, who do you serve? Like, who do you fight to protect? Your own nation, who's being led by like megalomaniacs, or the United States that's been really cruel to your people, but they have reasonable people. And the UN would obviously be siding with the United States side of that. So do you work for the UN or do you work for your nation? What a horrible question for him to have to face. Bitch, me. That sounds really... Oh, now I need to know if that's the right line of thinking for that game. Wow. G elements. G elements are really the backbone of all the motivation for all the major decisions. Except for Yuko's, which is about trying to save humanity. Granted, G elements are a big part of it, but she's, ironically, for how crazy she is, she's actually the one with the best, like, proper long-term, like, plan. Wow. This is really interesting. G elements, isn't that one of the core components of our fancy new bomb? Dang, it makes sense, but it's shocking to hear he's someone who's in such a high level of development for both like America and the UN, and this is like what he knows about G elements.
G 元素、つまりベータ由来の人類未発見元素は一定以上のフェーズに成長した背部でのみ生産されるからだ。
A good way to recognize G elements is that for whatever reason, they're essentially a second periodic table. Like, periodic tables, we assumed was always a building block of matter because it works off proton numbers in the cores of atoms. That doesn't change. As soon as you have an atom that has a certain number of protons in it, it gets you were to take one away somehow, violently most likely, the remaining element would take up the properties of whatever had that number of protons now that you'd removed one. But G elements operate like a whole nother table of elements and particles and interact with the world and the galaxy in ways that are completely different. Essentially, it's like unlocking a whole new set of material to work with. And some of that material does things like anti-gravity, super bombs, and all that crazy stuff. Are you shitting me?
G 弾にはグレイ11が。君がカムチャッカでぶちかましたあの電磁投射砲の心臓部にもグレイ9という G 元素が使われている。
Right. The railgun uses G elements. That's why he had to destroy the box. The core module is made from beta elements. That's why the beta swarmed the Shiranui second, because they were drawn toward their own elements.
現在の G 元素保有国は合衆国と日本のみ。それぞれアサバスカと横浜から回収したものだが、総量では合衆国が日本を大きく引き離している。だが、この事実は、合衆国が国家安全保障上、日本を切り離せない大きな理由になっている。戦後のユーラシア戦略から見ても、日本との同盟関係は絶対に維持しなければならない。
Yeah. So again, it's like Japan just looks like a vassal state, and even Japan might see themselves as that, but America is like, they're like terrified behind the scenes because they're like, they have this element stuff. Like, they can do some like we found just some basic crazy stuff, and they know Yuko exists, which might be why they allowed the terrorist attacks that target Yokohama base to happen. Just like the base here, like they allowed this terrorist cell to go. Maybe they are actually secretly backing it as well, as long as they can, maybe they negotiate allowing that attack to happen, because then it facilitates an attack that they want to happen, which is the attack on Yokohama, because they can destroy Yokohama base, they can destroy a source of their G elements, and destroy Yuko, who's like the only person who really knows how to utilize G elements properly. Wow. I am completely in speculation zone here, but holy crap. So that's how it is, huh? Explains a lot. Yeah, it does. Yuuya, this is really still all going over your head, but I'm drowning in stuff. Oh my gosh. After our disagreements with the Japanese about how they run a defensive campaign during the invasion of their mainland, we were ready and willing to terminate the security treaty. Except for that some reason, we began approaching them instead. Was it because of the G elements of Yokohama, and because we planned to secure Japan as a bridgehead to Eurasia to harvest the elements there after the war's over?
誤解を恐れず、単純化して答えるなら。
He's like, it's complicated. It's more complicated than that, but yes. Son of a bee. The whole deal is about setting the stage for to forestall Heinemann and the Soviet Union. Still, as convincing as this sounds, I'm not about to trust a man blindly when I can't confirm any of this. Good man, Yuuya. Well, their story is a mishmash of assumptions, analysis, and conjecture, and it's a challenge to tell which part is which. Dang it. This isn't about telling truth apart from fiction, it's about deciding for myself what's the right thing to do. But if Yui knew the circumstances surrounding the XFJ program, crap, even if she only made an informed guess, she must have been carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders this entire time.
貴様はそこに行くべきではない。安易に踏み込めば必ず不幸になる。
Lieutenant Colonel Detrova also made a decision, one that wasn't based on the truth, but rather on what her instincts told her was the right thing to do. No matter what misfortune it brought on her, no matter what the people around her might have believed.
想像してみてほしい。
What?
防御不能の大量破壊兵器 G 弾。通常運用可能なステルス兵器と電磁投射砲。そして、サンダーク隊の研究技術。
Holy crap, he's right. Think about that. The combination of all of them. G-bombs, essentially super nukes, right? Then the G-bombs too, like the critical thing people forget is the G-bombs use essentially the Geller fields that Yuko like perfects in the Susano. They were able to deflect the lasers. The lasers couldn't target them or hit them. They have like gravity warping, like essentially like a singularity type of system going on where you just can't touch them. It's a limited time, but it's enough to get the bomb where it needs to go, right? So no conventional weapons could stop a G-bomb once it's been launched, unless you develop some new technology they don't have yet. You fire it, it's gonna destroy everything it hits. There's no defense to it, right? Stealth hardware cannot be countered by other TSFs. The railgun was able to destroy an entire beta invasion by itself. Think of what you could do to an army. If you had one person with one of those railguns against an army, even of TSFs, what chance would they have if you could set up and defend yourself and get yourself in a defensible position? And then finally, Sandex research. If you have psychic pilots who can fly as well as the Scarlet Twins, and they had access to one of those railguns, you're talking about the perfect weapon defense system.
それらが合衆国以外の国に揃ったとしたら、人権侵害や人体実験を公然と行い、国際ルールを勝手な解釈で曲げ、あたかもそれが保障された権利であると嘘吹き、常に自らこそが被害者であり、正しいと強弁する国々にそれらが揃い。
And I think he's saying this like about Russia and Japan. I don't know if it's like intentionally saying it about both, but I think he's trying to say, if he's not, like, it applies to both technically. Because that's the thing, is like I love in this story, like the United States is awful, but Japan's not the greatest either. Granted, all our favorite characters are in Japan, and a lot of the people who we would trust doing the right thing are in Japan. But there's a lot of the people in Japan who aren't, like, in the higher ups, who are not great.
我が合衆国にはそれに抗する力が一切ない世界。
Again, like, I understand, especially if you're in the United States, you'd want to make sure that you could counterbalance any of that, all those threats. But at the same time, it's like, isn't it really haughty to say, like, it has to be us? It's like, it doesn't have to be you. I understand why you'd want it to be you, and I don't blame you for wanting it to be, like, your own nation. But at the same time, he makes it sound like it has to be the United States, or the whole world will come burning down.
それを現実のものとして想像してみてほしい。
Yeah, see, you shouldn't make a decision about this based on the emotions.
それは合衆国に、いや、人類にとってベータ以上の脅威となるだろう。我々は、我が合衆国は、そのような状況に至るのを座して見過ごすことなど断じてない。
Okay, yeah, see, now you're saying that Empire's evil, like, you're already showing your hand, like, you're far from objective right now.
我々は、アメリカはベストではない。
Amen to that.
だが、少なくともアメリカは、自らがベストにないという事実を知っている。そして、その事実を受け入れ、時に這いつくばりながらも、常にそうあろうと努め、 何度も立ち上がり、前進してきた。
I like the use of the translation, whether it's intentional or not, about like form a more perfect union, like him quoting like important historical documentation, like the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence. It would make sense if he's going at like the angle he's going for, that type of language would be used. Kudos and bravo to whoever interpreted that. But the other idea too is like, we don't hide from our moral failings. I'm not sure you've ever been to a history class in America before. I don't think any nation's could ever claim they don't hide from their moral failings. I mean, I think America's a lot more, is more open about it than other nations I can think of. You know, I mean, good grief. There are nations out there that have literally destroyed history to make sure no one thinks that the history that they're taught could be possibly wrong. And we don't do that. We certainly spin our own narrative, though. It's like we hide from our moral failure. Of course we do.
ブリッジス少尉。我々は共にアメリカ合衆国に忠誠を誓った同胞であり、家族だ。君ならやってくれると信じている。
Again, he's really going for the emotional manipulation. It would be impossible for me to confirm this stuff. His ramblings are almost indistinguishable from conspiracy fodder, and from the way he's so willing to overshare. I have a wonder what's his angle. Good thinking. But somehow, the pieces fit. Again, I do think he's got a lot of truth in this. I think most of what he shared is truth. In fact, I'd argue like pretty much all of it's truth, except for the stuff he doesn't know, and then he's made conjecture. But the conjecture is being offered as if it's truth, because it's being offered with truth, and he's not clarifying what he's conjecturing and what he's not. So he's wrong, but I don't think he's overtly lying. But I'm positive that the conjecture being spoken as if it's truth is completely intentional. It's not just him like being confident. It's about him manipulating the information to try and garner a specific response. A lot of weird crap's been happening since I came to Yukon, and now I know it's all connected. Man, if what Weller said is true, I can't imagine the pressure Yuuya must be feeling right now. There's no way in hell she'd be okay with relinquishing the XFJ program because her life is being threatened by the Soviets. Yuuya would never take that lying down. She's the kind of woman who's hell-bent on doing things by the book. Consequences be damned. And now she finds herself at the mercy of stupid political games and her hands tied and shackled in place. For someone who's always prided herself in living according to her values, this must be intolerable. I hope you talk to her about this. Yuuya can scream she chose this role of her own accord until she's blue in the face, but that doesn't make it any less unfair.
安心していい、ブリッジス少尉。君の懸念は推進剤や武装だろう？
I would be lying if I said no, but I was thinking about a whole number of things. He noticed I was worried, but missed the mark entirely. This guy thinks I have nothing but giant robots in my head, doesn't he?
94セカンドはあと2時間もすれば作戦待機状態になるはずだ。武装はサブマグ含めすべて実戦装備。推進剤も満載でね。
See, I really don't like this because they want him to start an incident. They want him to be attacking people and probably killing people. Like, that's not something you can just brush under the rug. That's something that's very destructive, and he wants them to, and they're letting him use a controversial machine. Essentially, again, they're using all of this, they're trying to stack the deck to make it so that no matter what happens, they win. Because, I mean, if Yuuya fails and dies, then it's just going to be like the excuse the XFJ program is corrupt, that they were able to get like the American pilot to try and like run away and seek asylum or something. It was taken out by operatives or something. Like they've got their bases covered. They're going to make sure they win no matter what. And it sucks because they're going to like let Yuuya take the fall for it most likely. Impressive. Did your people arrange that in advance?
Yeah. 今回の機密漏洩疑惑。国連軍が仲介を申し出てね。中立の立場でデータ収集を行うことになったんだ。
Uh-huh. You're not a neutral third party, though. You can't be. The UN forces. This is Colonel Hartwick's handiwork?
ATSF 計画と同じカリキュラムを消化し、 YF23 が残したデータと比較することで
Oh,
疑
right.
惑を解明するつもりらしい。完全武装なのはそのためだ。
I get it. Okay. It's not overtly supporting this operation. He's just saying that they were going to have a different pilot who was part of a third-party organization be flying the Shirinu second and giving it a test run to try once they tried to find like the inhibitors and really try and see what it's capable of. But because of that, the Shirinu second's ready to go. Did you say ATSF plan?
さすがだな、少尉。そう、テストはインフィニティーズがやる。
That makes sense. Neutral third party, my butt! The Infinities will find whatever the upper brass wants them to find.
ところが今、インフィニティーズは国連所属でね。そして、模擬戦を含む ATSF カリキュラムがこなせるのは、ラプターを装備する彼らだけだ。
Yeah, so convenient. Yeah, but that's just a technicality. Colonel Hartwig has to know the results of what is a foregone conclusion.
もちろん。この件は彼の発案だからな。
Seriously. Colonel Hartwig is only trying to keep the Infinities at arm's length to stop the United States from interfering. He must have thought their involvement in Project Prominence was too risky to let him roam free.
大佐にとって最も重要なのは、中止の口実となり得るプロミネンス計画内の不祥事もみ消しだよ。
That's probably right, but still.
しかも、秘密性が高い ATSF 計画のカリキュラム実演と、ラプターのデータ実測ができるとなれば、合衆国の G 弾戦略に強く反対し、戦術機強化によるユーラシア奪還を掲げる大佐からすれば、むしろ莫大なメリットだと思わないか?
Again, I feel like he's mixing a lot of conjecture into this to make it sound like Hardwick's really like wanting to make all this go. Like, I feel like he's attributing way too much to these people.
ソ連、中国ほどではないにせよ、ユーロ圏にも背部は存在する。この事実に、ハルトウィック大佐が無頓着であると、私はどうしても思えない。
I see. So that's what drives the colonel. Everything, and I mean everything, has to be in service of bringing Project Prominence to completion. I hate to admit it, but from his perspective, he's doing the right thing. And I can't blame him. I won't blame him. I've already seen the wallowing in self-pity does to a man. There's nothing but misery at the end of that road. Sticking with your guns, come hell or high water, against the entire world if that's what it takes. That's the kind of determination you need to succeed. But sometimes, when I let my mind wander, I start to wallow in my powerlessness, and it pisses me off.
さっきも言ったが、インフィニティーズは CIA の作戦に従事している。連中に94セカンドを抑えられると、後々面倒だぞ。
No kidding. But the CIA is planning to use the data to make the Japanese government do its bidding.
日本だけじゃない。ソビエトに対してもだ。かの国々は現在、合衆国の盾という重要な位置づけにありながら、共に根深い反米感情を抱いている。
I mean, I wonder why. It's not as if we've like repurposed their entire nation's cultures and identities in order to be shields to protect America from bad things. Who would be resentful of that?
日本は G 弾投下、ソ連はレッドシフト。それゆえに、今回の合衆国が明確に恩をあだで返される構図は、CIA にとって格好の印象操作ネタになるだろう。
So the CIA wants to make sure our shields have fallen completely in line, huh?
そして、戦後のユーラシアプレゼンスを担保するためにも、今回の事件、94セカンドとハイネマンのロシアスキャンダルを最大限に利用するはずだ。
Honestly, I don't know the first thing about Japanese politics or how the government works over there. But I know for a fact who's going to take the blame. Yuuya. They'll trample all over her principles and ideals again. When push comes to shove, her bosses will force her to take the fall. She'll be treated as a criminal caught red-handed, made an example of for the entire world to see.
なんだ。ずいぶん残念そうじゃないか。まさかとは思うが、国連の公平性に何か期待でもしていたのか。
Yes, actually. I have, insider information, but they are the closest thing to fair and even-handed. They genuinely are. Maybe. I wish I could just lose my temper like before I came to Alaska. Pigeonholing the UN as the bad guys would make life much easier for me.
では、国連の昔話を一つ。
Oh boy.
おそらく君にとって重要なことだ。
Personal relevance. This feels like the longest conversation I've had in my entire life. Yeah, and this is turning into like one of the longest episodes we've ever had.
ビアチェノワ少尉やシェスチナ少尉に施されている人体実験。あれはもともと国連が主導していたものだ。
Yeah, that's true. Unfortunately. Huh? Yeah, Idol testifies formally affiliated with the UN forces, but so what? The research itself is under the purview of the Soviet Union.
確かにな。それも事実だ。ところで君はオルタネイティブ計画というものを聞いたことがあるか？
Yeah, they are. Alternative project. The alternative what? I don't think so?
簡単に言えば、ベータの弱点や言語を調査するための国際機密計画機構だ。国連が主導し、ユーラシア各国の提案に予算を与え、実行している。
Right. Working together against a common enemy we don't know is the first thing about it is only natural. But what does it have to do with Cryska and Inia?
彼女たちを作った基礎技術は、約20年前、オルタネイティブ第三計画で確立されたものだ。
Mm-hmm. 20 years ago? Holy crap, the tech is that old.
最初の計画は、1966年のオルタ言語学者や数学者、各国情報機関の暗号解読エキスパートから動物学者まで、数千名が招集され、ベータの言語やコミュニケーション法を解明しようと試みた。
It makes so much sense. It's the first thing I'd try to do too. I've heard it's impossible to communicate with the crab patches.
奴らの起源は火星ではなく、外宇宙だと考えられている。そして、全く違う複数の種が社会性を持って共存している。この二つの事実が示唆するもの。そこには、恒星間航行を可能とする知性と、複数主観社会を成立させるコミュニケーション法が存在する。そう考える方が自然だとは思わないか？
He's really boiling down some very complicated stuff into a way that Yuuya can understand. When you put it that way, sounds like those gosh darn aliens are more than just mindless space locusts. Yeah. I always thought the beta are supposed to be something like ants or bees, insect-like creatures that coexist with the same social organization, each with their own role.
1968年、結局何の成果も上げないまま、計画は第2段階。つまり、オルタネイティブ2に移り、捕獲した生体サンプルを研究することで、直接的なコミュニケーションを試みた。
Man, I wouldn't want to be one of those scientists. Biological samples were the ones stored at the beta research facility that got blown up among them.
あれはもっと後に合衆国が独自に作ったものだ。オルタネイティブ計画とは関係ない。
Yeah, that was our own messed up stuff. Don't worry about it. Can't say I'm surprised. The beta are a threat to national security. No crap the United States would carry its own research.
サンプルの確保に多くの犠牲を払った第二計画も、結局、大した成果は出せなかった。
It did teach us a lot about their biology, though.
分かったことといえば、炭素生命体だの、消化器官や生殖器がないだの、異常な環境適応能力とそれに関わる酵素だの、およそコミュニケーションとは程遠いものばかり。
Man, I want to say some stuff, but I'm actually going to refrain just in case for some ungodly reason you're watching this and haven't watched, like, or read alternative, like, Muv-Luv Alternative proper. You really should have. But it's, like, such critical, like, story stuff at the end of that. I'm not going to quite say it, but let's just say that there's some pretty strong reasons for why, A, the beta are carbon-based, and why they are here destroying everything. It's really interesting. They have no digestive organs. Why the fetch do they eat people?
高度な科学技術を背景とする社会を形成し、宇宙を渡って侵略してきた異世紀原種が、言葉も知性も持たない。
Yeah, I like how he asks this really interesting question here. Why do they eat people? But Weller's gonna, like, move past that, because he's talking about, like, how could things that could travel through space and organize not talk to each other? But, like Yuuya has a very good question.
いわゆる、ベータのパラドックスというやつだが、それは当時、学者連中や各国の指導者たちをパニック寸前まで追い込んだらしい。 そんな雰囲気に押され、1973年に採用されたのが、ソビエト科学アカデミーの悪名高き第三計画案だ。構成艦渡航、軍事的組織行動と社会性、多種共生という観測的事実から、思考に類するものが必ず存在するはずだという仮説。いや、願望に基づき。
Yeah, or instinct. Something greater than instinct, maybe, but yes.
それを直接読み取ろうという科学というにはあまりにもオカルティックな試みは、当時、自暴自棄だのなんだのと相当の批判を浴びた。
A perfectly appropriate response. If someone said mind readers are real, he would have been laughed out of town, and I would have joined the chorus if I hadn't experienced it firsthand.
ベータの思考をイメージで捉えるリーディング。そして、自身の思考をイメージで投影するプロジェクション。
Right, exactly. Oh, it's so cool to hear it out here. It's like, it's been a while since we've talked about this. Sounds like an apt description of what Cryska and Inia's abilities.
それを行う能力者、ESP 発現体を増やし、その能力を強化する。第三計画に採用されたことで、研究は数十倍に加速した。
Accelerated how?
もともとソ連では、超能力を軍事転用する研究が進んでいた。諜報や索敵を目的とした国家プロジェクトとして。当時は月が陥落し、地球侵攻が始まっていたこともあってね。ソ連も日に日に国土を削られていく中、焦りと恐怖に駆られた者たちは、能力を人為的に強化するためなら何でもやったそうだ。
So he's still trying to spin Alternative 3 as this like madman's attempt, but yet they got results.
当然それはソ連と国連の承認を得てのこと。つまり、国連は人体実験を容認していた。
God. That's really interesting because he's taking this moral high ground, but you gotta think about it too. It's like humanity's going to die. Like we're up against a wall, and some people, unfortunately, are gonna have to make some really unsavory decisions that they probably will burn in hell for, kind of a thing. Somebody has to let those things happen, though. But it's like, who's like, is it worth it? Is it right? Do the ends justify the means? I mean, that's tough to say in a situation like this. So the Soviet Union did basic research and the United Nations put it into practice. Couldn't be otherwise that the alternative programs are the UN's babies.
現在では、日本帝国が立案した第四計画が進行中だが、人体実験まがいの施策が横行しているという意味では、似たり寄ったりだろう。
Interesting. So he's claiming, he's trying to make that again an association that Alternative 4 is super unethical. And like Yuko Sensei's ethics is definitely not, like, she really doesn't have them. She kind of does. She understands what people consider ethics, but she's willing to sacrifice all of them on the pyre in a heartbeat to get what she needs. But she's still driven by the ultimate goal of preserving human life. And while she has utilized people, she's not using human experimentation, except in the broadest of scopes when you consider what's at the core of her lab. I mean, technically human experimentation is true, but it's a lot less invasive than 3 and a lot less destructive than 4, but you could argue, like a lot less destructive than 3. But 5, you could argue, is one that doesn't actually, you know, it doesn't cross that line of human experimentation, at least in the broad strokes.
すべてがそうだというつもりはないが、ユーラシアの利益を代表する国連軍とは、おおむねそういうところだ。
Now, see, again,
人権も人道もあったものじゃない。
real convenient opinion to have when America has such a cushy, like, comfortable and very safe life. And also, like, he's obviously working with improper information.
サンダーク隊のポールネー・ザトミニー計画は、第4計画による接収直前のどさくさに紛れ、秘密裏に確保した独立研究チームが母体になっているらしい。
Okay, so yeah, that does make sense though, that like this like Pi 3 plan was harvested of the remnants of Alternative 3, because Alternative 4 did eventually get the remnants of that research, aka Kasumi. she was absolutely Alternative 3, but it's clearly not all of it.
その目的は彼女たちの能力を応用し、超常的な戦闘能力を発揮させることらしいが、人権や倫理を顧みない組織体質は第三計画からそのまま引き継がれているわけだな。
And again, it's like, can you, like, somebody does need to make these terrible choices, but at the same time, it's like, can you justify it? Usually, I would say historically, no. But at the time, was there another choice? It's almost the same issue with the use of the bombs on Nagasaki and Hiroshima. Like, can you argue and see points of view that say that dropping the bombs was the greatest benefit of being able to end the war quickly and with less civilian casualties than would have been a mass land invasion? Probably, yeah. I mean, if you really are open to the whole picture and the whole broad scope of it all and what was likely to happen, probably. Does that justify that? Maybe. But it also doesn't mean it wasn't terrible. That it was a really awful thing to do. And that it frankly feels like it really crossed a line that shouldn't have been crossed. But when you really get down to like the nuts and bolts of exactly what was going on at the time, it's hard to just be like, oh no, that was terrible. It's like, that should never have happened. It's also really hard to say like, oh, absolutely, that was the right decision. That's not how these types of things work. And hindsight's never going to really, really capture what that decision was and what the circumstances were around it. God, this episode's so long. So, how are those abilities supposed to increase their combat performance?
実際にどのような応用をもって能力を戦闘に転用しているのかは全くわからない。その確信に接近を試み、戻ってきた者は一人もいないからな。
Except you. So they made them disappear.
それにしても、たびたびシェスチナ少尉がうろついていたおかげで、君に対する我々の任務遂行も相当な苦労を伴ったよ。
I bet. Although, didn't she even imply that we were being watched? She just said it in a really odd way. Yeah, now that you mention it. If Inia can see your thoughts, how did you guys fool her?
彼女たちの能力はいわゆるテレパシーと認識されているような便利なものではない。その上、見えたイメージを翻訳するには、当人に相応の学習や知識、経験も必要となるはずだ。
Really? Sounds awfully close to the process of translating from one language to another. Completely different from implanting someone else's thoughts inside your head directly, even having a normal conversation.
それに、誰にも見つからないように君に会いに行くという行動目的が分かっていれば、動きようはある。むしろ彼女の方から我々を避けてくれていたがね。
Well, makes sense, I guess.
人がいないところを見つけるのは簡単。あまり好きじゃないけど。
Anyway, the idea is that conjecture again. This is the idea that he's just like assumed, oh, she avoided us because she was always like scanning, but that left us, it meant that we could kind of control and limit the amount of exposure we had. But rather, it's more of like, it's an uncomfortable thing for her to do, so she doesn't like to do it, which is why she avoided people. Maybe using her abilities is not as easy as simply taking a peek inside someone's head. I would bet that just talking to other people's minds is much less taxing.
これで分かっただろう？ブリッジス少尉。
What?
君の周囲の人間はほぼすべて自分の都合を優先して動いている。そこに君や君の周囲の者たちに対する配慮はない。あるとすれば自分に都合がいい場合のみだ。
In one way he's right, but then another way it's conjecture, because it's like just because that's the case in a lot of places doesn't mean that every single person is trying to use you. You can genuinely have friends. You can genuinely have higher ups that care and actually like are wanting to not involve you in stuff. It's a very black and white picture he's painting here.
だが、彼らは決して悪ではなく、人の情を忘れたわけでもない。個人的な感情を切り離し、割り切っているだけだ。
That's true.
そして、それは彼らが負う当然の責務であり、 また、多くの場合で彼らの判断は正しく、情を重んじる者に勝っている。
I don't like that. Even if he's maybe in a lot of ways that is true, I still don't like it.
だからこそ、彼らの立場や利益に君が配慮する必要は一切ない。君は自身の都合を堂々と優先すればいい。XFJ 計画班が、そしてサンダークの研究施設への侵入に関しては、すでに手はずを整えている。無論、非殺傷手段を用いる前提でな。
Interesting. He claims non-lethal, but he also said that the TSF was going to be armed. That doesn't seem consistent. I'll be. That's a tempting offer if I've ever heard one. It's not I'm not a spook, so I couldn't just shoot acquaintances in cold blood. Well, as considered all the angles. Impressive. But about everyone could push the first domino in this row, so I have to ask you again, why me?
こちらも繰り返しになるが、まず第一に、君がビアチェノワ少尉とシェスチナ少尉に興味を持たれていること。第二に、この件に合衆国が直接関与できないこと。これ以上国際的な非難を浴びるのも、日ソ両国との関係がアメリカの落ち度によって悪化することも避けたい。あくまで、恩をあだで返させる必要がある。CIA が直接動かないのも同じ理由だ。
Oh, maybe, I was just about to say, like, then why do they want the Shirinu Second involved? But Shirinu Second is technically part of the XFJ program, which is technically a part of the UN. And so it would then put the blame at the UN's feet. Especially if if America then covered up that Yuuya was the pilot and said that somebody else was the pilot. So like if Yuuya successfully gets in and gets out with Cryska and Inia, they give asylum to Cryska and Inia, they protect Yuuya and try and make it sound like it wasn't him, and they try and frame somebody else as being the pilot that stole the Shirinu Second to do whatever they were trying to do.
そして最後に、ブリッジス少尉。君こそがアメリカの英雄にふさわしいからだ。
There's that blatant emotional manipulation. A real American hero. Me? You've lost your mind.
茶化す？今から君がやろうとしている行動に与えられるべき評価は、ソ連が授けた政治的茶番や、ベータ撃破数の記録などといったものとは、次元が違うぞ。
Weller's making a mistake here. He is making a genuine mistake here. I think Yuuya is going to still do this, but I think this is where Weller's making the mistake that's going to convince Yuuya to not just lockstep in with this plan per se. Because he's still building off a premise in this idea that Yuuya strives for excellence because he wants achievement and recognition, that he wants to outshine his past and all that stuff, but that was never the true motivation at all. And it's certainly not what motivates Yuuya now. I think this is a good example of like how he has true information, but it's leading him astray because his conjecture is biased.
身の危険を顧みず、悲願に救う反米勢力の仇を告発し、ソ連の非人道的な人体実験を暴いて被害者である少女たちを救出する。正真正銘、英雄の行いだよ。
Interesting. What a nice little bow.
合衆国が生んだ新たなる世紀の英雄。その栄誉を受けるにふさわしい者は、君の他におるまい。
Interesting. Now you're laying it on too thick. I'm no hero material and you know it.
果たしてそうだろうか。南部の名門、ブリッジス家に生まれ、軍に志願して国家への忠誠を示し、
Again, he's really laying it on super thick. Holy cow, like, we're gonna drown if you don't stop.
入隊後、その卓越した才能と血の滲むような努力によって、アメリカ兵士の頂点であるテストパイロットとなり、さらなる難関である陸軍戦技圏のトップにまで上り詰めた。
Maybe he's trying to show Yuuya, like, what it could be. Like he's trying to say, like, no, Yuuya, this is the thing. This might not be the truth, but it's what people will think is the truth if we spin it right. Like, maybe he's trying to showcase, like, hey, this is about controlling the information.
生半可な覚悟ではそこまでやれまい。君が残してきた実績は、尊敬に値する。ダンバー准将、そして かつての戦友たちの熱い信頼もそれを保証している。
They say that about me.
謹厳実直。決して妥協せず、目的は必ず完遂する。とっつきにくいから話しかけることはしないが、お前と仕事したいって奴は山ほどいたぜ。てめえが気づかなかっただけだ。じゃなきゃ、今の立場まで出世できるわけないだろ。
I can't believe it. Like I'm gullible enough to buy that crap? Come on. He's just playing with me.
確かに君は部隊内での対人関係には問題を抱えていた。だが、その原因が職務に対する過剰なまでのひたむきさであることを誰もが認めている。
And again, it's like he's got right information and puts a little spin on it.
君の内面が全てではない。行動そのものや残した結果を彼らは分け、フェアに。
So the reason I can't bring myself to believe his words is because I never noticed what was right in front of my eyes? Crap, because I wasn't ready to notice. I've been living in the past all the time. The childish idea stuck in my head that it's me against the world. I just wanted recognition. That's why I acted the way I did.
それに加え、先日のユーコン事件では、勇敢にテロに立ち向かい、ベータと戦い、レッドシフトからアラスカを救い、合衆国に自身の持てる全てを差し出している。私は前にも言ったはずだ。君は誰よりも立派なアメリカ人だと。
Model American, huh?
同じアメリカ人として心から敬意を表すると。その気持ちは今も変わっていない。アメリカ市民には、合衆国の子供たちには今、君のような英雄が必要だ。ダンバー准将も期待している。君こそ多民族国家アメリカの象徴だとね。名門に生まれながら背負わされた複雑な出自を見事に跳ねのけ、マイノリティでありながら現場のトップに上り詰めた君の将来に准将は期待しているんだ。
Again, like they're talking, like they're both saying that he's like, oh, you're such a prominent figure because of your relation to like the Bridges family, but then they're also saying that, but you're also a minority. They're like really trying to. It's almost like they're so desperate to get him to agree with all of this, is they're just shooting for anything that could like really hook him. They're trying so hard. That alone would make me more suspicious. Actually, I'd be like, wait a minute, they're trying way too hard to make this sound appealing.
その若さで頂点に立った君は、ある意味で頭打ちになった。英種の道を極めることにこだわるなら、もう上がない。つまり、一生涯現場止まりだ。だからこそ准将は、君を国連にやったんだ。実体験を持って、より広い視野と見識を獲得し、より良き指導者としての素養を磨かせるために。
He's like, what? And then this is kind of what Leon was hinting at too, but isn't Leon just like a part of this whole thing? So I think Leon was sent to prime him for this approach, that Weller was intending to utilize Yuuya for a while to kind of try and get to Inia and Cryska. I think they're the real goals here. Yuuya is just a tool, but they primed him to try and make it all sound believable.
随分と強いコネをお持ちのようですね。
お前の移動は半分研修みたいなもんだ。たく、准将も甘すぎるぜ。
Why would the Brigadier General go so far for my sake?
准将自身が君に可能性を見出したからに決まっているだろう。だが、そのきっかけを作ったのは、エドワード・ブリッジス。君の祖父君だ。
Now that doesn't sound right. What? No fetching way, Mother Truck. There's no fetching way. That's not true. That's impossible. That's a very, the Luke Skywalker line. The old B was looking out for me? You can't be serious.
君がそう思うのも無理はない。
What?
仕方がないんだ。君は何も知らされていなかったのだから。
Kept in the dark? What are you talking about?
ダンバー准将と君の祖父君は、旧知の間柄だそうだ。
Come again?
陸軍時代のブリッジス氏は、准将の上官だったんだ。
Seriously.
やっぱずる賢くて卑怯なクズ殿だ。
東南アジアの捕虜収容所で父さんにひどいことをしたのは彼じゃないのよ。
あいつらは不意打ちで戦争を。
准将は言っていたよ。ブリッジス氏には公私ともに随分と世話になったとね。
He was paying it forward. The same thing I'm doing right now, helping Cryska and Inia as a way to return the favor.
ブリッジス氏が亡くなる直前、病床を見舞った准将に彼が言ったそうだ。
I don't know if I can believe
孫を
that.
よろしく頼むと。不思議なものだね。まるでその数年後、君が陸軍に志願することを知っていたかのようじゃないか。いろいろあったようだな。だが、ブリッジ氏も人間だ。いくら年を重ねようが、どれだけ地位や名声を得ようが、彼も一人の人間であり、親だ。手塩にかけて育てた大切な末娘に対する愛情と、現実を受け入れられない感情の狭間で、君にどう接していいかわからず、苦しんでいたのだろう。
Okay. Now he's making it sound believable, but I'm still not convinced. Ugh. The old man made my life hell for Mom out of a misguided attempt to show love and care for his daughter? Grandfather loved Mom, I understand that much. And when it comes to it, he was right about my father. So I knew why he hated me. The old man tried to keep me out of his sight because I resembled my father so much.
その意味でブリッジ氏は、何でも話せる親友、ダンバー准将にしか、君のことを頼めなかったのだろ
う。That can't be real.
余計なことかもしれないが、君たち親子を屋敷の敷地内に留め続けた事実からも、ブリッジ氏の思いが伺える。
What?
おそらく、CIA の対日工作や様々な政治的思惑から、君たちを遠ざけていたんだ。
But then that's weird because then you're saying that if that were the case, then he asked for a general in the army to help protect his grandson from the army, who then throws him right into the middle of a massive political mess and tells all of this to an investigator who works for the DIA, who's involved in the political machinations between the United States and Japan. That doesn't make any sense.
私が当時の国家安全保障に従事するものであれば、君たち親子を必ず利用しようとしただろう。そして、当時のブリッジス家には、それを阻止するだけの政財界、軍需産業界への影響力があった。彼ほどの人格者が、愛する娘が産んだ孫を心から憎むことなど決してできない。私は、そう思うがね。
God, there's so much. Did you know my grandfather?
いや、今話したことは、すべてダンバー准将から聞いたものだよ。だが、多くの事業で成功を収め、生涯を通じて国家的慈善活動に寄与した南部の名士を知らぬ者は、さほど多いとは思えないがね。
That makes sense.
そんなブリッジ氏の孫が、苦難と逆境を乗り越えて輝かしい経歴を得、今また合衆国と人類のために命を賭して不正に立ち向かおうとしている。それをなそうとする者を、英雄と呼ばずして何と言うべきかを。
Oh, sorry, interrupted him. No matter how far I run, the past will be right on my heels. Never asked for the old bee to look out for me. But that doesn't change anything. I owe him. Him and Yuuya and Mom and God knows how many others. Others who, wearing a mask of false courage, bear their burdens in silence and push forward.
さて、だいぶ長引いてしまったな。
Don't fetch me!
あと2、30分もすれば、 94セカンドの準備が整うだろう。私の話は以上だ。前回同様、強制はしない。自分自身の信念に基づいて決めてくれればいい。
Again, I said it from the beginning. It's not about persuading or pushing him to do a certain thing. It's recognizing that he's consistent and just motivating him in the right direction. It looks like he's gonna go for it. All right, we're gonna end it here. And I'm guessing if this is the last part of the game, I'm guessing we're entering the true end game. So this will be fun. But yeah, so I don't think I should apologize, but this is definitely a very long episode. If you're still here, I'm freaking amazed. Thank you so much, because there's a lot of really cool and exciting stuff. I got to speculate a lot about like the world building, which is stuff I haven't been able to do in a while, which is really fun. It just puts some really fresh and interesting perspectives on things, especially the missing pieces about like the G elements and the geopolitical situation involving them, and like why they are kind of the core motivator for a lot of the choices that are being made that I always was a little confused about. So that was really, really, really cool to be able to explore. I liked this presentation of information, just how it was a really good example of using truth to tell lies, which is just a genuinely actual, like it's a good way to persuade people to do things you want them to do, is lie to them with the truth, because it's really hard to pull that apart. Like, if you try to examine what you've been saying and they just keep coming up with, hey, yep, that was real, that was true, and people just start to believe the whole thing's real, and it's a good way to manipulate people. So I'm really curious to see what the fallout's going to be, and I'm worried that Yuuya is going to end up taking a lot more fall than he expects, unless this goes perfectly, which when does it ever go perfectly? So yeah, we'll just have to wait and see how that all happens, and yeah, I'm excited for next week. It shouldn't be this long. I really hate making videos this long because I think it's hard to watch something that's this titanic in size. And so I hope you don't mind, but I also just don't see this being something I can break up because it's all just packed together. And so I just don't expect it. Even if things are exciting and happening next week, I don't think it's going to end up being another 2-hour episode unless it just doesn't feel right to do it any other way. Just because this is not my usual. This is not something I want to see very often on the channel. But I digress. Time for me to get going. Thank you so much for being here today. Thank you so much for joining me on the channel, for being a part of this journey, for sharing in the Muv-Luv universe once again. It's so much fun. Thank you especially to patrons and members for believing in the channel, believing in me, and that I'm worth investing in a little bit so I can try and make the channel that much better. But, you know, being here watching, especially for long videos like this, and liking and comments and all of that is all so much more important than anything you could ever do for the channel. So thank you so much. I hope we continue to grow. I hope we continue to enjoy these stories together and be able to explore many more in the future. So until the next video, watch me. I'll see me next. I'll see you there.